Shut your mouth, girl. Black kids from the ghetto don't have mothers in Delta Force. With pure venom dripping from every word, the teacher spat directly into the face of a 16-year-old black student right in front of the cheering bullies. The classroom door was locked tight. Phones were raised high, capturing every humiliating second. The girl was tormented, pushed to an absolute breaking point, all for daring to stand proud about her mother. The teacher didn't just allow it, she orchestrated every single cruel moment. The bullies laughed louder, convinced they'd won, certain no one could ever touch them. Then, without a single warning, the door blasted open. A figure in full combat uniform strode through the swirling dust. In that frozen heartbeat, the air turned ice cold. Smirks vanished, eyes widened in raw terror. Power flipped in an instant. Lies shattered like glass. The ones who had mocked and cheered were about to beg for mercy in ways they never imagined possible. Dare to watch until the very end. You won't believe how intoxicatingly sweet justice can truly be.
History breathes at Oak Creek. It wears a polished, terrifying smile. It beams from mirrors, from donor plaques bearing the same old names, from legacy kids draped in bulletproof family armor. Every hallway whispers a singular cold rule. Change requires permission from the elite. This morning, the air felt suffocating, heavy with the silence preceding a wreck. Mrs. Elaine Herrick stood ready, a gatekeeper who turned textbooks into jagged weapons without ever raising her voice. Herrick touched her pearls, checking the lock on her lacquered hair, crisp suit, a smile thin as paper. Her voice grated like cold metal on stone. "Today," she announced, "we honor the order preserved by principled men. Progress lacks simple heroes." She treated tradition as divine, yet her tone froze when enslaved approached. She didn't deny the past, she sanitized it, relegating suffering to footnotes, shadows meant for the margins. Oak Creek had conditioned them perfectly, nod on cue, laugh at the scripted jokes, and never ask questions that carried a price. Then a hand rose, steady, defiant. Nyla Hayes. Herrick didn't see a student, she saw a glitch in her machine. Nyla's voice arrived flat, placing truth down like a heavy file. "When citing principle," Nyla said, "measure the cost. People were commodities, families were dismantled for pure profit. That isn't order, it's a predatory business model built on stolen lives." A chair squeaked. Pens froze. Oak Creek specialized in controlled silence, not noise. Blair Langford tilted her head, wearing that effortless, curated beauty. Varsity boys exchanged predatory looks. Herrick's smile thinned, sharpening. "We discuss structures here, not feelings." Nyla didn't blink. "Naming facts isn't emotion. If your framework requires erasing the victims beneath it, it isn't history, it is a calculated cover-up." That silence cut. A few students nodded subtly, deniable gestures. Most stared at notebooks, fearing the danger of being seen. "Enough," Herrick snapped. "Oak Creek values civility, not personal crusades." Nyla lowered her hand. No theatrics. The truth just burned there, unignorable. The bell rang, sharp, metallic, triggering a frantic retreat. Perfume and hallway chaos flooded the room. Nyla zipped her bag, the sound jarringly loud. Blair drifted over, flanked by two predictable shadows. She leaned in, wearing a hollow grin. "Cute performance," Blair whispered. "Passion looks so cheap in third period." Nyla moved to leave. Blair blocked her, eyes cold. "What's in the diary?" Before Nyla could react, Blair snatched the worn leather book. "Return it," Nyla said, her voice dropping into a dangerous flat calm.
"Look," Blair mocked, flipping pages like a prop. "Dear Mom, I miss you, but I know you're Delta Force, saving the world." She barked a brittle laugh. "Delta Force? Really? Who writes this trash?" Cruel snickers spread. Some laughed to fit in, others to avoid the target. Nyla swallowed the heat. "It's mine." Blair sang. "Then it's pathetic. Delta Force? That isn't for people like—" She stopped, the insult implied, the outline hanging heavy. Nyla reclaimed the book, fast, controlled. "My mother served. You don't have to believe it. You will not mock her." The boy surged, then faltered under Nyla's scorching gaze. She packed the diary, forcing her pulse to steady. Herrick watched with the clinical detachment of a scientist. She stepped in, not to correct the cruelty, but to execute a sentence. "Enough, Nyla. Sit. Stop disrupting us with fairy tales. No more disruptions." The verdict bit hard. Nyla's truth was erased, her voice revoked. Students filed out, avoiding her like a contagion. Nyla retrieved the diary from the floor, wiping grime from the leather with trembling fingers. She hugged it tight, masking the ache. Isolation set in. The world's old lesson for black girls echoed, "Your voice only exists by their leave." Herrick adjusted her pearls, wearing a thin, triumphant smirk. The machine hummed. The order was restored. For now. Nyla's eyes didn't leak. They sharpened. Not explosive rage, calculated intelligence. A quiet, razored promise took root. Later, as laughter died in the long corridors, Mrs. Herrick sat alone. The vending machine hummed a low electric drone. On the table sat a manila folder, Hayes, Nyla. Her fingers drummed a slow, predatory rhythm against the cardboard. Tap, tap, tap. No hesitation, no doubt. In her mind, ancient grudges aligned with fresh schemes. Deep within Oak Creek's smiling gears, a decision solidified, neatly, coldly, on exactly how to dismantle a girl who dared to remember the truth.
Mrs. Elaine Herrick opened the manila folder with a private, hungry satisfaction, like she was unsealing a verdict she'd already written. The label stared up at her in block letters, Hayes, Nyla. She expected ammunition, something sloppy, something she could parade through the halls like proof. Instead, the paper fought back with its silence. She scanned the lines once, then again, slower. Parent/guardian, Simone Hayes. Rank, Colonel. But under service record, nothing. No unit assigned, no deployment history, no glittering accolades, no Delta Force. Just a sterile, classified wall of withheld information, the kind the state uses like a shield. Herrick's smirk thinned. Her fingers tightened. The folder snapped shut with a dry crack that kicked a swirl of dust into the light. Of course they hid the truth. That was the point. But in Herrick's mind, silence became confirmation. She built the story fast, neat, and cruel. Nyla Hayes wasn't protected. Nyla was a fraud, an outsider climbing higher than she deserved, claiming ghosts for medals. That's how Herrick framed it. Not as a guess, but a certainty. The kind of lie that lets you sleep after ruin. This resentment wasn't new. It had fermented for years. Every time Nyla's hand rose, steady, correct, it felt like a strike. Every perfect score, every calm answer, Nyla never begged for permission. Herrick didn't see talent. She saw defiance. Deep under the pearls lived a grief Herrick only touched to sharpen into a weapon. Her husband, a police officer, had died during a routine stop, a story she wore like a jagged badge. Grief didn't soften her. It curdled. It seeped into her classroom, turning lessons into a private war fought with grades and humiliation dressed up as order. Oak Creek rewarded polish, not honesty. Holding Nyla's file like a shield, Herrick stepped into the hallway's hierarchy.
trophy cases, donor plaques, legacy names repeating like scripture. Near the lockers, Blair Langford leaned with her phone, surrounded by a loyal orbit of admirers. Blair was exactly what Oak Creek protected, wealth and ambition sharpened into a blade. And Blair had a problem Nyla couldn't help but be. Nyla outshined her, consistently, without trying. Blair coasted on connections, errors forgiven, edges sanded smooth by power. But Nyla's brilliance had no strings. It just appeared, day after day, like light. Herrick raised 2 fingers, a summons. Blair, a word. Blair glided over, smiling as if for applause. Herrick opened the folder, tilting it to reveal the blank spaces, the silence that looked to predators like weakness. Military service, Herrick murmured, sounding almost amused. No unit, no specifics. I suppose your classmate's mother is just a clerk, not a hero. A staged pause. People should be embarrassed to invent such fantasies. Blair's eyes narrowed as opportunity flared. She'd waited for this, the day Nyla's quiet wins could be dragged through the mud. I knew she was fake, said Blair, her voice syrup-sweet. She acts so superior. Her smile sharpened. If she loves lies, maybe she should learn the cost. Herrick's mouth didn't smile. It didn't have to. Permission lived in her silence. I don't tolerate disruptions, said Herrick softly. Sometimes things resolve themselves. The match was placed. Blair walked away, feeling the rush of power as the hall swallowed her, lockers slamming, laughter rising in waves. Near the gym, she found Hunter Briggs and Cole Drayton, big bodies inflated by a town that never said no. Blair didn't approach like a bully. She approached like a queen. Hey, she whispered, leaning in. Want to have some fun? Nyla's spreading lies about her family. Even Herrick is disgusted. A bait, the hook. Time for a lesson. Hunter chuckled low and hollow. Scare her? Cole grinned, enjoying the game. Make her beg. They said it like consequences were for others. Blair leaned closer. Herrick's done protecting her. We have the green light. Hunter and Cole exchanged a silent agreement. Oak Creek taught them the rules early. Boys like them don't fall, not with the right names. Blair's final sentence landed like a curse. Make sure she regrets opening her mouth. The bell rang, sharp, metallic, a sound that should mean freedom. Students flooded the exits, laughing. But in that crowd, Nyla felt the shift. Not a release, a warning. Safety had just left the building.
Sunlight failed to penetrate Oak Creek's rear lot. Shadows swallowed the day early, devouring every stray beam. The oxygen felt thick, heavy with rot. Time stalled, creating the perfect vacuum for cruelty to find its mark. The cafeteria drained in a toxic rush, vicious laughter and chair scrapes echoing through marble halls. Nyla moved with the herd, balancing her tray, shoulders stiff from practiced survival. Since the final bell, dread had constricted her chest, a physical weight she couldn't dislodge. She nearly reached the exit when the rhythm shifted. Heavy footsteps approached, not accidental, not casual, predatory. Hunter Briggs and Cole Drayton intercepted her, varsity gold gleaming against the gray, dead concrete like a warning sign. They looked eager, lethal, ugly. Lost your way, Hayes? Hunter sneered, anchoring his frame. Delta Force's finest, Cole mocked, snorting, or just a military myth. They laughed with rehearsed, hollow cruelty. You act untouchable, Hunter sneered, all because your mother plays soldier in the dirt. Nyla's fingers whitened on her tray. Adrenaline surged, deafening her. I'm just trying to leave, she stated. Her voice was flat iron. Move! Hunter struck the tray with casual violence. Food shattered across the pavement, fries skidding, milk pooling like a wound. He threw his head back, barking a hollow laugh. Oops, my bad, hero. Didn't see the invisible girl. Call for backup. Cole circled her, savoring the keel. Or call Mommy. What's her actual job? He leaned in, breath hot. Bet she's not elite. Bet she's just
entertainment for the real troops, serving in more ways than one. The insult cut deep. Witnesses froze. Phones emerged. No one moved. At Oak Creek, cowardice was the social currency. Nyla's jaw locked. Rage surged, electric and jagged. "Don't you dare mention her," she hissed. Her voice trembled but didn't break. "You know nothing about her. You know nothing about sacrifice." Cole stepped closer, his grin sharpening. "Oh, we know. I heard she's just an army brat's favorite distraction." Hunter erupted. "Hear that? Little Nyla's mom is a hero, or just a cheap mistake in camo." "Shut up!" The scream tore from her, raw, primal, years of silence shattering like glass. Enough. More students flocked, drawn by the scent of a crash. Drama was the only law here. The unspoken rule held: record everything, help no one. Hunter's amusement died. His gaze turned obsidian. "Wrong move, bitch." His foot lashed out, fast, ruthless. Nyla's momentum failed. Her knees cracked against the stone. Agony bloomed, a blinding white fire. Laughter cascaded over her, sharp and merciless. Cole loomed, his venomous crawl. "Don't look for help. You're invisible." For one heartbeat, fury flared, white-hot, desperate. She envisioned striking back, screaming, drawing blood. Then the gravity hit. Shame, cold, suffocating. Why did I engage? Why did I feed the monsters? She dragged herself up, hands quivering, eyes burning. The world felt cavernous. Her existence felt microscopic. Students streamed past, flickering with pity, fear, or chilling indifference. Nyla retreated, clutching her broken tray, disappearing through the nearest heavy door. Into the stairwell, the rotting one, peeling lead, shadows, grave silence. There, the composure finally splintered. Her frame shook as she slammed against the cold cinder blocks, gasping for oxygen. She needed her mother now, desperately. Fingers trembling, she fumbled her phone, dialing the only anchor she had. Ring, ring, ring. Void. Silence. Her mother was light years away. Uniforms, classified orders, the vast distances that bury family emergencies under duty. The call hit voicemail. Nyla swallowed, but the floodgates had burst. "Mom, it's me. Her voice fractured, words spilling out jagged and small. "Can you come home, please? I know you're on mission, but I really need you. I miss you." Dead air followed. She disconnected, crushing the phone against her heart as the tears arrived. Hot, soundless, relentless. Locked inside a stall, she collapsed to the tiles, knees pulled tight, forehead against the porcelain. Sobs convulsed her, drowned by the echoing laughter in the corridor. She heard the girls, Blair's melodic razor-sharp giggle, still mocking, still invincible. A brutal reminder that safety didn't exist here. For a breathless moment, Oak Creek vanished. No bullies, no teachers, just a girl and her hollow grief, gripping a hope that withered with every breath. But humiliation wasn't the finale. Not for Blair Langford, not for her curated pack. In Oak Creek's dark morrow, a more permanent solution was already being forged. Not merely to bruise Nyla Hayes, but to delete her.
After the bathroom, Nyla attempted to vanish into the outgoing tide of students. She moved with chin tucked, backpack dragging like dead weight, legs operating on raw instinct through fluorescent corridors that felt suffocatingly narrow, jarringly loud. The humiliation replayed in jagged fragments, faceless voices, infinite laughter, the visceral echo of a fall she couldn't fully recall but felt in every bone. She counted steps to drown out the noise. 1, 2, 3. Don't falter. Don't look up. Just breathe. "Hey, Nyla, Mrs. Abbott needs you regarding your last exam." The voice brushed her shoulder, soft, flickering, as if terrified to exist. Relief momentarily loosened the constriction in her chest. Mrs. Abbott, the quiet mathematician who never flinched, who never treated Nyla like a pending catastrophe. A room defined by logic, rules that remained static, safety. "Room 307. The girl whispered, retreating instantly, eyes averted. Nyla nodded, desperate to escape the swarm. She missed the 3 silhouettes lurking at the hall's edge, faces flickering behind locker doors, patient as jagged tramps.
Room 307 sat isolated, far from the main artery, a classroom reserved for scheduling glitches or vanished staff. The lights hummed with a sick electric buzz as Nyla entered. The door clicked, too sharp, too definitive. Her skin crawled. She pivoted. Hunter Briggs and Cole Drayton occupied the frame, sealing the exit, massive, immovable. Their smiles were empty, predatory voids. Blair Langford sat perched on a desk, legs crossed, phone already angled, recording the kill. "Well," Hunter remarked casually as if sharing a private joke, "caught our little ghost." Nyla stiffened, spine hitting a desk. "What do you want?" "Relax," Cole muttered, circling. Sweat, cheap musk, the stench of unchallenged privilege. "We just want to witness a real Delta brat in action." Blair tilted her head, voice a chilling silk. "Begin filming." She smirked at the lens, then at Nyla. "Remove the jacket. Show us the costume your mother issued. Find the hidden badge." Nyla retreated into the wood. The edge bit into her thighs. "Stay back!" Too late, Cole lunged. Hunter closed the distance. Their shadows devoured the floor. Blair laughed, sharp, staccato, preserving every second. This wasn't a prank. This was a calculated execution. Strip her. Erase her. Hunter's hand clamped her shoulder. Something snapped. Her mother's training surfaced, cold, precise, lethal. No hesitation. Strike first. Nyla twisted, stomped, elbowed ribs with a sickening force. Hunter grunted, shock breaking his mask. She spun, driving a knee upward clean and brutal. He collapsed, gasping. Before Cole could pivot, her hand sliced the air, striking his throat with clinical accuracy. He staggered, clutching his neck, eyes bulging in disbelief. Blair shrieked, her phone trembling. "Get her!" Nyla stood her ground, lungs burning. "Don't touch me!" Her voice was a blade. "Not today!" For one heartbeat, oxygen felt possible. The door was a beacon. Escape was a breath away. Then the rage returned. Hunter surged, agony fueled by humiliation. He crushed her wrists. Cole slammed his weight behind him. Together, they pinned her against the desk. Wood groaned. The air was punched from her body. Her legs thrashed, useless against their combined mass. Blair stepped closer, the lens inches from Nyla's face. "Cry," Blair hissed. "Give 'em a show." The corridor outside remained deafeningly silent. No footsteps, no intervention. Oak Creek had mastered this complicit quiet. Panic rose, bitter, choking. Nyla thought, muscles screaming, refusing to surrender. "Hold her!" Hunter panted. "Teacher!" Nyla met Blair's gaze. She refused to weep, refused to plead. Her frame shook, but her spirit held. She thought of her mother, of drills designed for combat, not high school closets, of a system that preached virtue while practicing malice. Blair sneered. "Smile for the internet, or vanish." The knob rattled. Hope flared, sharp, agonizing. The door burst open. Light flooded the space, sterile and white, cutting through the shadows. Hunter froze. Cole recoiled. Blair adjusted her posture, mask snapping back into place. Nyla turned, heart hammering, breath caught. It wasn't a savior. Mrs. Elaine Herrick stood there, arms folded, immaculate, pearls glowing, eyes like ice. Her smile formed slowly, a rehearsed, hollow thing. "Well," Herrick whispered, surveying the wreckage, "this is unfortunate." Hunter released Nyla, retreating. Blair lowered the device, feigning innocence. Nyla slid down, trembling. "They—" Herrick raised a finger. "Silence. No excuses." Her gaze was a dismissal. "I warned you about disruptions." She looked at Blair. "Go, all of you, before this escalates." The bullies fled. Blair lingered to smirk before vanishing. Herrick closed the door. Click. "This," she said, "is the cost of confusing fantasy with reality." Nyla looked up, raw. "You knew!" Herrick adjusted her pearls. "Learn your place. Oak Creek protects its own."
Herrick loomed in the threshold, her frame sharpened by the jagged antiseptic hallway lights. Arms crossed, spine rigid. Tyranny realized. She didn't rush, she didn't gasp, she didn't recoil at the brutality before her. 2 athletes pinned a black girl to timber. Blair filmed, lens steady, feral. Nyla Hayes remained crushed beneath them, lungs fighting for shallow, jagged air. Herrick witnessed it with the cold neutrality she used for filing attendance papers, as if this were expected, as if nothing here disrupted her order. "Mrs. Herrick," Nyla gasped, the plea fracturing. "Help me!" The teacher stepped inside. She shut the door. The lock engaged. Final. Sealed. Inescapable. "Anarchy in my room, Nyla," Herrick noted flatly. "Inevitable." Her lips curled, thin and arctic. "You're just another common delinquent at heart." Hunter and Cole didn't loosen their violent grip. Instead, they shoved harder. Blair, fueled by the adult's permission, surged forward, pivoting the lens for Nyla's face. Tears. Evidence. "Told you," Blair cooed. "Empty." "They ambushed me," Nyla screamed, struggling, voice raw with shock. "You're seeing this. You're standing right here. You're just letting this brutality unfold now." Herrick's expression remained granite. "All I see," she countered, "is you attacking 2 merit students." She tilted her head, assessing. "Perhaps you need reminding why your kind never advances in places as elite as Oak Creek High. Understand? Good." Hunter snickered. Cole's fingers bit deep. Blair smiled, capturing every second of pain. Malice settled into the room like a heavy, toxic vapor. Nyla shuddered with fury. "You think you'll escape this?" she spat. "My mother is a colonel. She is returning soon, and when she finally finds you—" Herrick moved closer. The air froze. "Your mother," Herrick whispered, voice dropping, "is a black woman mimicking a system that will never truly accept her." She leaned in, close enough for Nyla to taste her cold, bitter breath. Precise, surgical, lethal, absolute. "You can fabricate ranks, medals, myths," Herrick continued, "but everyone here sees exactly what you truly are." Nyla's fists whitened. Her mind roared. Years of effort, discipline, pride, shattered into dust by people who wore their hate like a crisp uniform. Herrick's mouth twisted, trembling. Then she spat. It landed warm against Nyla's skin. Time fractured. The room fell silent except for Nyla's hitching breath. The shame burned hotter than any bruise. Blair's laughter sliced the quiet. The boys jeered, triumphant. Herrick straightened. "Your mother isn't elite," she said calmly. "She's a fraud, and you're a glitch that is being deleted today." Tears stained Nyla's face, but her eyes remained sharp, unbroken. Her voice arrived low, hoarse, not a plea, but a calculated, dark promise. "This isn't over." Herrick turned away, already savoring victory, and the door exploded inward. Oak shattered, splinters tore through the room. The metal lock sheared clean from the frame with a violent crack that paralyzed the air. Dust surged, instantly swallowing their screams. No one breathed. Hunter's grip failed. Cole recoiled. Blair froze, her recording device shaking in her hands. Through the swirling haze, heavy boots crossed wreckage. A figure occupied the threshold, tall, broad, unstoppable, backlit by the raw, white hallway light that flooded the darkness. Even Herrick retreated a step. In that shattered silence, the old order died. The storm Nyla had promised was here.
Every inch of Colonel Simone Hayes radiated command. Her presence bent the room before she spoke a word. Deep brown skin caught the fluorescent glare without softening it, reflecting nothing back. What seized every eye, though, was the uniform, Delta Force camouflage, immaculate, pressed to razor precision. Ribbons and medals lined her chest in disciplined rows. Silver eagle pins burned on her shoulders. A sidearm rested at her hip, locked and ready. 2 military police flanked her, imposing and silent, eyes sharp, hands near their batons, posture broadcasting a single truth: control had arrived. Simone's gaze swept the classroom once. That was all it took. The silence cracked first in the guilty. Hunter and Cole recoiled as if burned, hands yanking away from Nyla like she had turned to live iron. They stumbled backward, shoes scraping linoleum. Blair's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering across the floor and vanishing beneath a desk. Her practiced smirk shattered, disbelief rushing in to replace it. For one stunned heartbeat, Nyla only stared. Then hope surged, battered, fragile, desperate. "Mom," she breathed. Simone moved. Boots thudded across the wreckage, each step measured, deliberate. The MPs slid outward, sealing the doorway, their presence snapping an invisible circuit shut. The room shrank. Simone's face softened when she reached Nyla, hair disheveled, eyes glassy, humiliation still clinging to her skin. She knelt without hesitation, drew a tissue from her breast pocket, and wiped the spit from Nyla's cheek with a gentleness that broke something in the room. The gesture was quiet, intimate, devastating. It drew a line between cruelty and care, and everyone felt it. "I'm here, baby," Simone murmured. Her voice was low, steady, unshakable. Nyla choked on a sob and clung to her, relief and shame colliding in her chest. For a breath, it was only them, distance collapsing, years of missed moments compressing into one embrace. Simone's hand rested between Nyla's shoulder blades, a firm anchor, counting breaths until the tremors eased. Then Simone rose, and whatever tenderness lived in her eyes vanished. What replaced it was colder than anger. It was judgment. She stood, and the air seemed to compress around her. Mrs. Elaine Herrick tried to summon authority. "Excuse me," she said, voice trembling despite herself. "You can't barge in like this. This is a private school. Your authority means nothing here." Simone faced her, unblinking. "Private schools operate under the laws of this nation," she replied, tone resonant and controlled, "and under the authority vested in me as a colonel of Delta Force. You crossed a line no citizen is above." Herrick's mask slipped, her mouth curled. "You think a uniform intimidates me? This is a misunderstanding. Nyla attacked—" "Enough!" The word landed like thunder. The MPs straightened, hands drifting closer to their belts. Even the hum of the light seemed to dim. "I saw enough the moment I entered. You allowed 2 boys twice my daughter's size to assault her. You stood by. You added your own abuse." Her eyes cut to Hunter and Cole, who shrank into the wall, shoulders caving inward. "You should pray the law treats you better than you treated my child." She stepped closer to Herrick, close enough that Herrick could smell the clean starch of the uniform and the cold resolve behind it. "You spat in my daughter's face. In doing so, you spat on the flag I bled for, and on the country you claimed to serve by teaching its children." Her voice dropped, not softer, but heavier. "You want authority? You're about to witness it." Herrick faltered. Her knees buckled. She caught the edge of a desk, knuckles white, breath coming shallow. Blair pressed herself flat against the far wall, eyes darting for an exit that no longer existed. Hunter and Cole stared at the floor, mouths slack, the reality of consequences finally landing. Simone turned to her MPs. "Lock the door. No one leaves until the sheriff and the superintendent arrive. Secure all video evidence. If anyone attempts to erase, hide, or alter recordings, arrest them for obstruction. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," they answered in unison, the words snapping like a salute. One MP retrieved Blair's phone, gloved hands careful, screen still glowing with the frozen image of Nyla's face mid-struggle. The officer nodded once, confirming the file's integrity. Evidence now, not a weapon. Another MP radioed in, voice calm, precise, requesting immediate response. The room froze in a new way, time stretching, inevitability setting in. The teacher who believed herself untouchable, the bullies who moved as law unto themselves, the girl they tried to erase.
all of it rebalanced in a single irreversible moment. "I fought for this country's honor in places you can't pronounce," Simone said, not loudly, but with impossible clarity. "I bled for it, I buried friends for it, and I will not let its children be destroyed by cowards in positions of trust." She paused, letting the words settle where excuses used to live. "You failed your duty, every one of you." She took Nyla's hand. Nyla, still shaking, stood beside her, spine straightening, breath deepening, safe for the first time in weeks. Herrick could only stare, hollow, her world unraveling tread by tread. "You can't do this," she whispered, already knowing she was wrong. Boots echoed in the hallway, locks clicked, sirens wailed in the distance, faint at first, then unmistakable. A bell rang somewhere else on campus, cheerful and oblivious. Mrs. Herrick sank into a chair, bravado extinguished, fear coating her mouth. Her pearls caught the light and looked suddenly cheap, fragile. For the first time, she understood the truth she had spent years denying. She was no longer in control.
Sirens convulsed the air, bleeding through the dying daylight, flooding the windows with violent stroboscopic streaks of red and blue. The resonance pressed inward, warping the room's gravity. Inside the classroom, the hierarchy had inverted so violently that the atmosphere felt dense, industrial, charged, lethal. Fear paralyzed the guilty, relief liberated the broken. The final reckoning had breached the gate. Miss Elaine Herrick collapsed into her chair, her manufactured authority leaking away with every passing second. Colonel Simone Hayes remained an immovable monolith. She required no shouting. Her silence was a terminal command. No heart beat without her implicit permission. Nyla stood anchored to her side, spine rigid, salt tracks drying into scars on her cheeks. The two MPs barricaded the door, their presence absolute, converting this space into a soundproof vault. Herrick spoke eventually, forcing a polished calm into her tone, that toxic, syrupy cadence she reserved for boards and donors. "Colonel Hayes, this is surely a minor administrative misunderstanding. Adolescents, specifically high-risk ones, frequently manufacture narratives for social leverage." She cleared her throat, a dry, desperate sound. "Your daughter suffers from chronic embellishment. You understand how these emotional girls operate." Simone didn't blink. "Abort the performance," she whispered. "I heard your soul through that door." Hunter merged into the cinder-block wall. Cole retreated from every eye. Blair Langford sat frozen, mascara dissolving into black tears, a silent fury simmering beneath her terror. For one heartbeat, the room seemed destined for an agonizing stasis. Then an MP stepped forward, shattering the deadlock. "Colonel, with your permission," he gestured to the obsidian device mounted to his chest. A crimson light pulsated. "My body-worn system has been operational since we entered the corridor. It documented the layout, every participant, and the precise moment the battery occurred." Simone nodded, a sharp military verdict. "Secure the encryption. It is federal evidence." Herrick's jaw locked. "A body camera? Illegal. This is a sanctuary for learning, not a combat zone. That constitutes a massive privacy violation." "It is the law," Simone countered flatly, "and your current defense is as hollow as your integrity." Blair's facade finally disintegrated. She lunged off the desk, crawling toward the boots, sobbing. "Not me. It was them. Hunter and Cole. They coerced me. I begged them to stop. Please don't incinerate my future. My father." "That contradicts your previous enthusiasm," Hunter snapped, his mask of loyalty burning away. "You relished every second of her suffering," Cole added, his own venom spilling. Simone neutralized them with a singular obsidian stare. Both predators recoiled. "None of you escape the gravity of your choices," she stated. "You will answer to the state for every perjury, every suppression."
Herrick attempted one final pathetic maneuver. "Colonel, your child is a disruption. She is volatile. I was enforcing institutional discipline. She lunged at the boys upon my arrival. It's a tragic miscalculation. As a mother, surely you sympathize." Simone fixed her with a gaze that could dismantle iron. "The only thing I recognize is justice, and you wouldn't identify it if it shattered your door and dragged you into the light." The NPs signaled. "Sheriff unit on site, 2 minutes." Simone turned to Nyla, her voice softening into steel. "The silence breaks tonight. For you and every child told their existence is a footnote." Nyla nodded, her pride igniting through the exhaustion. Masks were failing everywhere. Hunter and Cole's swagger turned to bile. Blair Langford hid her face, her privilege finally reaching its expiration date. Herrick's knuckles whitened against her skirt. The sirens peaked. Reflections strobed across the floor, brighter, inevitable. Simone straightened her medals. "Today," she declared, "I teach the history this school tried to erase. Consequences." The sirens ceased. Car doors slammed. Boots pounded the hall. Safety felt quiet, solid, but Nyla sensed it. The real architect was waiting in the principal's office. His reckoning had just begun.
Principal Curtis Morrow sank into his leather throne, the material groaning under a weight it never anticipated. His fingers trembled as he adjusted his silk tie, a reflex honed over decades when charm silenced every crisis, except today. The office air felt stripped of oxygen, as if his moral authority had been surgically evacuated. He looked smaller now, a man suddenly divested of his curated shadow. Colonel Simone Hayes remained an immovable pillar. She didn't pace or loom, she simply occupied the room with the density of a black hole. Power without noise, power without motion, the kind that never negotiates because it has already won the war. Nyla stood anchored beside her, chin raised, spine rigid. The student who had entered as a liability now stood as the ultimate witness, and Morrow sensed the tectonic shift in her posture, the terrifying clarity in her eyes. He recoiled. He knew weakness. This was truth. "This is a catastrophe," he whispered, voice cracking. "You underestimate the fallout. Donors, legacy alumni, power players, these stakeholders do not suffer losses quietly. You are burning down an institution for one girl." Simone's gaze pierced him. "Neither do the victims," she said coldly. Outside, the corridors hummed with cold, professional chaos. Deputies moved like scalpels, doors cycled shut. Students watched in fractured, stunned silence as the Oak Creek facade, its manicured prestige, its polished lies, was dismantled in real time. The air tasted of ozone and the arrival of a storm. Morrow swallowed hard and grasped for leverage. "Publicity will kill us. The endowment, scholarships, athletic programs. You'll ruin innocent students who had zero involvement." Simone moved closer, a lethal shadow. "Students are already broken," she countered. "They simply lacked the correct last names to warrant your protection." Her words struck iron against his desk. A deputy appeared at the threshold. "Morrow," he said, detached, "we require your full statement. Also, all disciplinary archives for Hayes, Briggs, Drayton, and Langford. We want every expunged file." Morrow's blood vanished. "Expunged records?" "Every single one, sir." Simone studied his tremor, the flash of panic, the frantic calculus, and named it for what it was. "Systems don't fail because of isolated sins," she said evenly. "They collapse because of calcified patterns, like yours." Morrow opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he had no script. A strange heat settled in Nyla's chest, not triumph, just validation.
The truth was no longer her burden alone. It had weight, witnesses, forensic records, and inevitable consequences. An officer approached. "Ma'am, the superintendent is requesting a briefing. He's visibly panicked." Simone nodded. He definitely should be. She turned to Mila. "Remain here. An MP will safeguard you until I return." Nyla paused. "I'm fine now," she whispered. "I know. That is why we win." As Simone moved toward the hall, Morrow found a last dying spark. "Colonel Hayes," he pleaded, "there are giants above me. You have no idea whose territory you're invading." Simone stopped and looked back with a gaze tempered by fire and desert sands. "I've survived war zones you couldn't endure for an hour," she said. "If you believe wealth or networking terrifies you, you misjudged my character from the start." She exited. The door clicked. Final. Sharp. Morrow stared into the void she left, his distorted reflection mocking him from a glass-framed award, leadership excellence, the irony burning like acid. Outside, Nyla stood guarded by soldiers, watching her prison dissolve into a crime scene. An officer approached. "You chose the right path," he said softly. She nodded, believing it for the first time. Sirens faded into a rhythmic waiting. The vehicles didn't leave. They entrenched, surrounding the building with accountability rather than force. Nyla recalled classrooms and whitewashed lessons, smiles masking systemic cruelty, and understood this wasn't just about her bruises. It was about decades of silent suffering finally ending. The office door opened again, and Morrow emerged, escorted by police, smaller, diminished, armor stripped by light. As he passed Nyla, his eyes found the floor. She didn't blink. Down the corridor, the superintendent arrived, stiff and anxious, already drafting a hollow press release. Simone intercepted him, posture granite, their exchange brief, low, lethal. No smiles remained in Oak Creek. The world had shifted. Nyla exhaled. For the first time since entering the school, the atmosphere felt different. Not safe, not yet, but honest. And honesty, she knew, was the most lethal weapon this place had ever encountered. This wasn't the conclusion. It was the moment the truth stopped asking for permission.
The hallways of Oak Creek High hummed with the artificial calm of police procedure, a brittle quiet stretched thin over flashing urgency. Red and blue lights pulsed against trophy cases, washing faces in alternating color as students and staff clustered in tight, nervous knots. In a shallow alcove, officers and administrators leaned inward with clipboards and notebooks, forming a closed ring where truth could be edited in real time. Principal Curtis Morrow hovered at the edge, always within earshot, never quite center, his presence a reminder that control preferred proximity. Nyla Hayes sat on a molded plastic chair, feet flat on the floor, spine straight despite the ache radiating through her shoulders. Her backpack rested against her ankles like an anchor. Colonel Simone Hayes stood beside her, jaw set, posture immovable, eyes tracking every movement with a vigilance earned far from classrooms. The two MPs flanked the corridor behind them, transforming the hallway into a sealed passage. The sheriff, a man trained to project neutrality, scribbled notes and nodded with practiced gravity, then asked questions that sounded balanced but cut selectively. A uniformed deputy approached Blair Langford and her parents with careful deference, tone softened, pen poised. "Miss Langford, could you describe the altercation?" The pen hovered, waiting. Blair sniffled, mascara streaked, her father's hand heavy on her shoulder like a reminder of consequences. "It was a misunderstanding," she said. "I tried to stop them. Hunter and Cole, it got out of hand." Her father's eyes stayed cold, calculating, as if each sentence were a move in a longer game. Contain, redirect, minimize.
Her mother nodded along, lips pressed thin, already rehearsing the next call. Hunter Briggs and Cole Drayton kept their heads down, offering lines rehearsed to sound ordinary. "She hit me first," Hunter muttered. "I was just trying to get my stuff back," Cole added, voice flat. Their words slid easily into familiar boxes. The sheriff glanced toward Elaine Herrick, who had regained her composure and leaned in with practiced authority. "Nyla Hayes has always struggled with discipline," Herrick said. "She tends to provoke her classmates. I intervened as soon as I saw things escalating." It was language honed over years, violence diluted into misbehavior, malice repackaged as kids being kids, pens scratched, boxes filled, mutual aggression, schoolyard dispute. Simone watched the reframing happen in real time and felt the old heat rise, the one that carried her through deserts and windowless rooms. She turned to the sheriff, her voice precise and level. "You do realize this was an organized attack, that my daughter was assaulted while faculty watched. You're recording this as roughhousing?" The sheriff cleared his throat. "Ma'am, these situations are complex. We're doing our best." Simone didn't raise her voice. "No, you're doing what's easiest. I demand this be treated as assault and a hate crime. There is evidence." Silence fell heavy. Eyes slid away. Morrow offered a nervous smile. "Let's not be hasty. Oak Creek has a reputation." A shuffle interrupted the circle. Ray Hensley, the janitor most days no one saw, stepped forward from the crowd. His uniform was faded, his hair thin, his face lined by years of work that earned little notice. Today he stood straight. "Colonel Hayes," he said, steady. "Permission to report, ma'am." Simone's eyes widened, recognition snapping into focus. She nodded. "Proceed, Sergeant." The sheriff hesitated, then asked, "You have something to add, sir?" Hensley nodded. "Former Gunnery Sergeant Ray Hensley, United States Marine Corps. I saw the incident from the supply closet. I didn't intervene because I need this job, and people like me don't get second chances. But I couldn't watch and stay silent." He reached into his pocket and produced an old flip phone, plastic yellowed, buttons worn smooth. "I recorded everything," he said. "Mrs. Herrick's remarks, the attack, all of it." He handed the phone to the sheriff, who paused, then accepted it. No one breathed. Hensley stood at attention, eyes glassy, unafraid. "I served to protect justice, not to look away." The sheriff played the file. Audio spilled into the hall. Herrick's sharp prejudice, the taunts, the laughter, the impact, Nyla's plea. The sound cut through the corridor like a blade. Students leaned closer. Teachers stiffened. The sheriff's tone changed. "This alters the charges," he said quietly. "Assault, hate crime, conspiracy to obstruct." He looked up. "Thank you, Sergeant Hensley." Hensley nodded, shoulders easing, a weight lifting after years of carrying silence. Simone leaned toward Nyla. "With sometimes the quietest people carry the most courage," she whispered. Nyla swallowed, something warm and steady spreading through her chest. The mood shifted, the shield of impunity cracked. Students looked at Nyla with something new, respect. Phones lowered, whispers changed pitch. The machinery of cover-up stalled, gears grinding against evidence spoken aloud. Morrow's face drained of color. He tugged at his collar, eyes darting between the sheriff, the deputy, and Simone. "We'll cooperate fully," he said, too quickly. "Of course, Oak Creek values integrity." The words rang hollow. Herrick's composure fractured. She stared at Hensley as if he'd stepped out of a past she tried to erase. Blair's father whispered urgently to a lawyer on his phone, voice tight. Hunter and Cole shifted, swagger gone, replaced by a sour fear that stuck to their skin. The sheriff issued instructions. Secure all devices, separate statements, no one leaves. Deputies moved, professional and calm. The hallway transformed from stage to process. Doors closed softly, radios murmured. Simone watched it all with a measured calm, hand resting lightly at Nyla's shoulder, not possessive, not protective, simply present. Nyla stood up when asked, answered clearly, eyes steady. Each sentence landed with weight now. Witnesses, audio, time-stamped truth. As officers guided people away, Hensley stepped back into the crowd. A few students nodded to him. One teacher met his eyes and looked away. He didn't mind. The quiet had done its work. Outside, sirens faded, replaced by the low thrum of engines idling, waiting. Oak Creek's lights glinted off polished floors, but something underneath had shifted, not repaired, exposed. Simone surveyed the corridor one last time. "This doesn't end here," she said softly, to Nyla, to the building itself. Nyla nodded. She felt it too. What came next would be louder, colder, fought in rooms without windows. The Langfords would marshal money, the school would issue statements, but the truth had moved from rumor to record, and records, once opened, are stubborn things.
The Oak Creek police station, washed in fluorescent glare and lined with cracked vinyl benches, felt less like a sanctuary of justice and more like a demilitarized zone where privilege came to negotiate its survival. The waiting area churned with pressure. Parents paced tight circles. Lawyers whispered into phones. Officers drifted in and out of interview rooms, carrying clipboards and sealed envelopes, their movements clipped, procedural. For a town built on quiet arrangements and buried favors, this night threatened to rip the mask off everyone. Simone Hayes sat at a hard metal table beside Nyla, uniform immaculate, posture unmoving, eyes steady and unblinking. Across from them, Blair Rangford's mother, pearls immaculate, spine rigid, conferred in low tones with a partner from the town's most powerful law firm. Hunter Briggs's parents, faces flushed with rage and embarrassment, demanded supervisors and explanations. Near the back wall, Blair's father was already on his phone, voice tight and venomous, calling in every favor accumulated through 2 decades of donations, sponsorships, and quiet school board leverage. The building hummed with entitlement, colliding with consequence. The first strike came fast. The Lawsons' attorney crossed the floor with polished confidence, folder tucked neatly under his arm, and addressed the lead detective. "My clients intend to file charges against Colonel Simone Hayes for destruction of public property, intimidation of minors, and intentional infliction of emotional distress," he said crisply. "This was an unprovoked assault. Our children are traumatized. They are seeking compensation and a formal retraction." Simone didn't move. She waited until the detective turned toward her, then gave a single nod. At that cue, her counsel, Major Allison Grant, sharp-eyed and composed, placed a heavy folder on the table. The sound carried. "Colonel Hayes will cooperate fully," Grant said evenly, "but I strongly recommend you review these documents first." Blair's father scoffed. "More sob stories?" he snapped. "This is about safety. She broke down a door. That's a federal offense." Grant opened the file and spread the contents across the table with methodical precision. "This is not about a door," she said. "It's about patterns." She tapped the first page. "A racial harassment complaint filed 2 months ago, dismissed without investigation. A transfer request from a family whose child was bullied out of Oak Creek. An incident report from last year involving football players and a student of color. No follow-up, no discipline." The detective leaned closer, brow furrowing as the same surnames surfaced again and again. Lawson, Briggs, Herrick. Simone spoke quietly, letting the evidence do the work. "This isn't the first time this group has hurt someone weaker. My daughter's only offense was telling the truth. I intervened to stop a crime in progress, exactly as both the law and my oath require."
Brad's father slammed his fist on the table. "Are you threatening us?" Simone met his glare without blinking. "No, Mr. Briggs. I'm informing you that the law applies to everyone." Blair's father leaned forward, jaw clenched. "You want to play hardball, Colonel? My company employs half this town. You start this war, it will get ugly." Grant didn't flinch. "You should mention your company," she said calmly. "We've included an additional file, recently declassified under a federal review. Military procurement invoices tied to Lawson Industries, suspected overbilling of the Department of Defense, currently under investigation." She paused. "We can forward this to the FBI, or keep it here." Silence collapsed the room. Blair's father went pale, his phone slipping in his hand. His wife stiffened, confidence draining from her posture. Their attorney leaned in, whispering urgently, but the damage was done, raw, uncontainable. Hunter's mother stared at her husband in disbelief. "You knew?" she whispered. He shook his head, words failing him. Blair looked to her father, trembling. Instead of protection, she met fury. His hand cracked across her cheek, the sound sharp and echoing through the precinct. She gasped, clutching her face as officers surged forward. The balance shifted instantly. The detective straightened, eyes hard now. "Colonel Hayes, we'll need formal statements from you, your daughter, and Sergeant Ray Hensley. The district attorney will determine charges." Simone nodded once. "We'll be ready. Ensure every piece of evidence is secured. Nothing disappears." Outside, Nyla squeezed her mother's hand. For the first time, hope outweighed fear. Behind them, alliances crumbled. And somewhere, beneath the station's fluorescent hum, a deeper, older secret, tied to Elaine Herrick, began clawing toward the light.
The holding cell walls were sterile, institutional gray, the kind of color chosen to erase personality rather than contain it. Overhead fluorescence flickered with a faint electrical whine, exposing every wrinkle, every involuntary tremor, every failure of composure. Elaine Herrick, once the high priestess of Oak Creek's order, the woman who ruled classrooms with clipped syllables and immaculate posture, sat hunched on a steel bench. Her hands were knotted into shaking fists, knuckles pale, nails digging into skin as if pain might anchor her to something real. Her attorney hovered just beyond the bars, murmuring instructions about silence, restraint, strategy. She couldn't hear him. Her own voice drowned everything out, ricocheting off concrete and metal, growing sharper and more hysterical each time it looped back on itself. "It's upside down," she spat, eyes blazing with unfiltered fury. "This whole world is diseased. I gave 30 years to education, molding minds, teaching respect, and this is my reward?" She laughed, brittle and cracked, spat on by thugs, by animals. "I'm the victim here, not them. I'm the last one who believes in discipline in this circus." A uniformed officer stood outside the cell, stone-faced, flipping through paperwork as if her tirade were nothing more than static. Forms were stamped, pages shuffled. Somewhere down the hall a door buzzed open and closed. The station moved on without her. A detective stepped in briefly, asked for her statement. Herrick lunged at the opening, unleashing another torrent. Her rights, her persecution, her warnings about social decay and what happens when they're allowed to take over. The detective absorbed none of it. He stepped out again, the door clanging shut behind him with a sound that landed heavier than any word. Across the precinct, in a quieter interview room stripped of drama, Detective Mateo Reyes spread files across a scarred metal table. He'd spent years in corruption units, years listening to powerful people insist that they were misunderstood. He knew the cadence, he knew the tales. Beside him, another officer placed a thick manila folder on the table, stamped in red, confidential. This was the part that mattered. They traced the narrative Elaine Herrick had wielded like a weapon for decades. Her late husband,
Officer Alan Herrick, the martyr, the fallen hero, shot in a line of duty by a criminal who represented everything she despised. The story had hardened into gospel at Oak Creek, repeated so often it became immune to challenge. It justified her bitterness. It sanctified her cruelty. It gave her permission to see enemies everywhere. But buried in city archives, sealed at the family's request, dormant until a right warrant cracked them open, was a different account. Internal affairs, years of it, allegations that never reached court because the department preferred quiet endings, bribery, evidence tampering, a small ring of officers skimming seized drug money and laundering it through informants and fake reports. Alan Herrick's name surfaced again and again, not as a victim, but as a participant. The final night wasn't an ambush. It wasn't a random act of violence. It was a confrontation behind a warehouse lit by a single broken security light. Alan Herrick's service weapon wasn't drawn on a suspect. It was aimed at another officer, Derek Sloan, who had discovered the theft. Voices rose, accusations flew, guns came up. When it ended, Alan Herrick was bleeding out on cold concrete, killed by the very system he believed would always shield him. Reyes compared timelines, ballistics, radio logs, witness statements that had been buried under non-disclosure agreements, the pieces locked together with brutal clarity. They brought Elaine Herrick into the interrogation room. The manila folder waited on the table like a blade suspended above her. Her attorney sat beside her, suddenly unsure of his footing. The confidence he'd carried into the precinct thinned as he sensed the ground giving way. Reyes didn't waste time. He slid the folder forward, his movements controlled, deliberate. "We've heard your story. Here's the real one." He read the final paragraph aloud. No emphasis, no flourish, just fact. Alan Herrick was killed during an armed confrontation with fellow officer Derek Sloan following an attempted division of illicit funds. Not a black suspect, not a random crime, a dirty cop killed by another dirty cop. Elaine Herrick stared at a tabletop as if it had betrayed her. For a moment the fight drained out of her body. Her hands fell limp into her lap, her mouth open, closed. No sound came. Then a whisper, thin and fractured. "No, this isn't how it happened." Reyes didn't soften. He leaned back, letting the silence do its work. "You spent years poisoning this community. You turned grief into doctrine, doctrine into hate. You used a lie to justify destroying a child's life so you wouldn't have to face the truth about the man you married." Her attorney tried to object, words tumbling over each other. Reyes slid another document across the table, the hate crime evidence, the classroom transcripts, the recorded slurs. "Your husband wasn't a hero, Mrs. Herrick. He was a criminal who died running from exposure, and you picked up his weapon, just in a different form." That was when she began to shake. Not the performative trembling of outrage, but something deeper, something structural. Memories she'd sealed away clawed upward. Alan's rages, the late-night arguments, the constant fear that someone would knock on the door and end the story she'd constructed, the lies she told herself, the relief she felt every time she redirected her pain onto someone else. Her shoulders collapsed inward. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed, the sound raw and unguarded. The shell of righteousness cracked open for the first time in decades. Outside the interrogation room, the truth moved fast. Word spread through the precinct in low voices and widened eyes. The teacher who had crowned herself a martyr was exposed as a fraud, someone who had projected her own shame onto children who had no power to fight back. Officers who had once deferred to her authority now avoided her gaze. Her name, once spoken with deference, was now attached to case numbers and charges. When the door finally closed and she was left alone, Elaine Herrick curled in on herself on the bench, rocking slightly. She wasn't crying for her husband. She was crying for the collapse of the world she had built on sand, for the realization that the lie she lived inside had finally turned on her. And still, this wasn't enough. Truth alone never was. Justice would have to follow. Public, documented, impossible to rewrite. It would have to reach Oak Creek's classrooms, its boardrooms, its polished assemblies where silence had been rewarded for decades. Parents would demand answers. Students would ask questions that could no longer be dismissed. Cameras would arrive. Records would surface. Names would fall. Elaine Herrick would no longer be remembered as a disciplinarian who lost control, but as a case study in how power curdles when protected too long. Somewhere else in the station, Nyla Hayes sat beside her mother, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, hands finally steady. She didn't know all the details yet. She didn't need to. She could feel the shift in the air, the subtle but undeniable sense that something old and rotten had been pulled into the light. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the moment the lie stopped holding.
The auditorium at Oak Creek was swollen beyond capacity, a living mass of bodies and breath pressed together under harsh lights. News crews crowded the rear aisles, lenses raised like weapons, red tally lights blinking as they hunted every twitch of disgrace. Parents filled the rows, shoulder to shoulder, whispering anxiously, hands locked around their children's wrists as if the building itself might lunge. Students spilled into the aisles, some in pressed uniforms, others in faded denim, drawn by the same gravity. This wasn't a performance. It wasn't celebration. It was a reckoning. At the front, the school board sat in a rigid line behind a polished table, faces scrubbed blank, eyes darting whenever the crowd stirred. Principal Curtis Morrow occupied his seat like a man awaiting sentence, his expensive suit failing to hide the sheen of sweat along his temples. The superintendent, stiff and humorless, rapped the gavel for order. It echoed thinly, a sound too small for the moment. A lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently to the chairwoman, who nodded without absorbing a word. In the front rows, Simone Hayes sat with Nyla's hand locked firmly in her own. Tonight there was no uniform, no insignia, just a mother, shoulders squared, watching her daughter face a room that had tried to erase her. A few seats behind them stood Ray Hensley, freshly shaved, spine straight inside a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence carried its own testimony. The chairwoman cleared her throat and leaned toward the microphone. Her voice emerged smooth, practiced, reassuring. "We recognize that there have been recent incidents," she began. "We want to assure the Oak Creek community that student safety remains our highest priority." A few parents murmured approval. Most did not react at all. They had heard this language before. They knew its weightlessness. The superintendent followed, hands folded. "After a thorough review, the board has decided that Mrs. Elaine Herrick will be granted early retirement, effective immediately. We thank her for your years of service and hope to move forward together." The words landed wrong, too clean, too final. A ripple moved through the students, anger, disbelief, a low hiss of outrage. In the front row, Nyla Hayes sat with Nyla's hand locked firmly in her own. Tonight there was no uniform, no insignia, just a mother, shoulders squared, watching her daughter face a room that had tried to erase her. A few seats behind them stood Ray Hensley, freshly shaved, spine straight inside a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence carried its own testimony. The chairwoman cleared her throat and leaned toward the microphone. Her voice emerged smooth, practiced, reassuring. "We recognize that there have been recent incidents," she began. "We want to assure the Oak Creek community that student safety remains our highest priority." A few parents murmured approval. Most did not react at all. They had heard this language before. They knew its weightlessness. The superintendent followed, hands folded. "After a thorough review,
The board has decided that Mrs. Elaine Herrick will be granted early retirement, effective immediately. We thank her for your years of service and hope to move forward together." The words landed wrong, too clean, too final. A ripple moved through the students. Anger, disbelief, a low hiss of outrage. In the front row, Nyla felt the old instinct rise, shrink, disappear, survive quietly. Simone squeezed her hand. Nyla inhaled, straightened. She stood. The movement cut through the room like a blade. Conversations died. Even the camera stilled. Nyla stepped into the aisle and walked toward the microphone. Each step felt exposed, amplified by the silence that followed her. She stopped at the podium, small beneath the unforgiving lights, steady despite the tremor in her chest. "My name is Nyla Hayes," she said, her voice carried cleanly to the back of the auditorium. "I was told my story didn't matter. I was told to stay quiet, to be grateful, but I won't be silent anymore." Her eyes swept the room, students, parents, teachers, reporters. What happened to me wasn't an accident. It wasn't kids being kids. It was hate, and it was silence from people with power. The air tightened. People leaned forward. It was every time a teacher looked away, every time someone said it was just a joke, she continued. This isn't about one day or one person. It's about how we treat anyone who's different, anyone who's alone. Her hands steadied on the podium. I want to live in a world where being different isn't a crime, where your family, your skin, your story don't make you a target. A pause. Then, quietly, I survived because my mom believed me, because people like Mr. Hensley told the truth when it was dangerous. We shouldn't have to fight this hard just to be treated like we matter. Something broke. A black girl in the second row stood, tears spilling unchecked. "She did it to me, too," she called out. "She said I'd never be anything because of where I came from." A Latino boy rose beside her. "She mocked my English, made me read out loud so everyone could laugh." Another voice followed, then another, Asian, biracial. A white girl in a hand-me-down dress, whispering through shaking lips. "She said my family didn't belong here." The room surged to its feet. Stories poured out, furious, trembling, long buried. Accents mocked, futures dismissed, bullying ignored. Years of quiet humiliation detonated in waves. The chairwoman hammered her gavel, voice cracking. "Please, this isn't—" No one listened. Journalists scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. Even some teachers lowered their heads, unable to meet the rising tide. Simone watched from her seat, tears streaking silently down her face. Ray Hensley nodded once, jaw tight, vindicated without triumph. At last, the superintendent stood again, shaken. "We hear you," he said, voice unsteady. "We cannot undo the harm, but we will begin to make it right. There will be a full investigation, real accountability." The board bowed their heads, stripped of ceremony. As the meeting dissolved into motion and sound, something unfamiliar swept the auditorium. Raw, brave, honest. For the first time, truth outweighed fear. Nyla stepped back from the microphone, not victorious, but unburdened. Silence no longer protected injustice. And as people filed out into the night, those who had once felt invisible walked taller, lit by something stronger than lights. The harshest punishment had already been delivered, not by a ruling, but by the realization that the world had moved on, and no one was left standing beside the lie.
The board hearing terminated, but the aftershocks vibrated through Oak Creek's marrow like a low-grade seismic event. Media crews disassembled tripods, their minds already synthesizing viral headlines. Students flooded the parking lot in jagged electric clusters, their voices crackling with raw catharsis and a fragile, dangerous hope. The institution had exhaled. But for a select few, the former untouchables, that breath signaled the start of a permanent exile. The hierarchy was officially dead. Blair Langford was a product of curated power. Her father's signature opened doors, her mother's lineage closed ranks. Influence permeated her world like a heavy, expensive perfume, inescapable. For years, her peers orbited her, misinterpreting proximity for protection. Tonight, the gravitational center collapsed. News of her suspension outran the departing broadcast vans. Her device detonated with notifications. Some offered synthetic concern. Others radiated a naked, predatory satisfaction. A few were celebratory strikes. She stood solitary outside the auditorium, arms fused across her ribs, scouring the crowd for ghosts. Familiar faces had already vanished into the shadows. Hunter Briggs and Cole Drayton had always functioned as her auxiliary, loyal muscle, scripted laughter, tactical enforcers for her whims. Not tonight. Blair's pulse spiked when she located Hunter near the kiosks, surrounded by his family's suffocating presence. He offered one cold, fleeting glance before averting his eyes, jaw locked in a survivalist stance. Further down the corridor, Cole leaned against the brick, eyes anchored to his screen, ignoring her frantic, desperate wave. Their families clustered, whispering in urgent, panicked tones. This wasn't about dominance now. It was about litigation. Blair forced her way through the thicket of parents and legal counsel, reaching Hunter first. "Listen," she hissed, her voice a jagged wire. "We need a strategy. This is unacceptable." He severed her connection without looking up. The bravado she had cultivated in him was gone, replaced by a chilling, Arctic detachment. "Don't, Blair. My father says your family is the primary target. We aren't incinerating our legacy for your choices." The words landed with the weight of a physical blow. She stared, paralyzed. "We are an alliance!" Cole snorted behind her, refusing to lift his chin. "Delete that. My parents possess the transcripts. Every message was your initiative. You wanted the girl broken. You claimed Elaine Herrick sanctioned the play." Blair's mouth worked soundlessly. He wasn't fabricating. She had drafted those digital autopsies. She had savored the cruelty until the world inverted. Now the evidence was a noose she had tied herself. Hunter's father surged forward, faced a volatile crimson, finger stabbing the air. "Sever contact with my son. We will testify that he merely followed your pathological lead." Cole's mother echoed, her voice brittle with terror. "Do not approach my boy again. Your father's capital cannot buy your way out of this." The perimeter tightened, hostile. Friends once ruled by fear evaporated, suddenly occupied, suddenly blind. Blair pursued Cole toward the glass exit, desperation fracturing her composure. "Please, they're projecting everything onto me." He shrugged, his eyes flat and vacant. "Maybe you should have calculated the risk before you recorded the crime, or before you laughed." He stepped into the night. The heavy door swung shut between them, the latch clicking with a final, clinical precision. Blair remained paralyzed in the hall, surrounded by judgmental whispers and obsidian stares. No longer a sovereign, just another student marked for social deletion. Hours later, her mother navigated the drive home in a hollow silence. Her father refused eye contact at dinner, tethered to his phone, activating every legal contact in his directory. Her screen flooded with leaked screenshots, rumors metastasizing through encrypted chats, parents threatening civil suits. She scrolled, hunting for a singular spark of sympathy, but discovered only scornful memes. The following day, her suspension converted her into a ghost. Barred from campus, photos of her vacant desk circulated anyway, a digital warning to anyone believing status could outrun gravity. Even in her absence, the narrative expanded.
Former allies stopped responding. Group threads went silent. The world that once rotated around her whims kept spinning, indifferent to her fall. She was being erased. Near midnight, Blair sat by her window, the phone's cold glow illuminating her face, scrolling backward through her own digital history, hunting for a scapegoat. But every artifact reflected the same truth. Her smirk, her sneer, her curated laughter. She recalled mocking Nyla Hayes, the way Hunter and Cole obeyed her commands, the way Elaine Herrick enabled the malice. Now the silence was absolute. No one returned her calls. The machine had stopped. She paused on a homecoming image, manufactured grins, hands flashing the legacy sign. She had believed they were untouchable. All she could identify now was the void where she stood, the jagged shadow of her own maneuvers severing her from the reality she once dominated. The legacy was a lie. The connections were transactional. Everything she had built was made of sand, and the tide had finally arrived to claim it. Downstairs, her father engaged in muffled warfare with attorneys. Her mother wept in the kitchen. Solitary, Blair pressed her brow to the glass and exhaled. For the first time, she comprehended the punishment she never anticipated. Not the suspension, not the legal storm, but the suffocating absolute loneliness of being discarded. At Oak Creek, the wheel had turned. The order was raw but honest. The silence was now her only companion.
The courthouse anchored the town center with deliberate permanence. Marble pillars rising like vows, doors engraved with promises, the state seal carved to intimidate doubt. But on the morning of Elaine Herrick's trial, the interior air refused to settle. Reporters packed the benches, shoulder to shoulder, lenses lifted like instruments of judgment. Parents and students crowded the aisles, faces tight with expectation. The room crackled, not with noise, but with the charged quiet of a community forced to stare at its own reflection. Elaine Herrick sat at the defendant's table with her hands folded too carefully, knuckles pale. The crisp authority she once wore had evaporated. In a plain suit, she looked diminished, smaller than the power she had wielded, thinner than the myths she had enforced. Her attorney murmured guidance she barely registered. Her eyes kept drifting to the back rows, searching and dreading at once, as if some final rescue might still arrive. None did. The charges were read aloud, heavy and unmistakable. Child endangerment, assault, hate crime. The judge, known for her intolerance of excuses, took the bench, posture severe, voice precise. She framed the case without theatrics. This was not simply about individual cruelty, she said, but about a system that enabled silence, protected privilege, and allowed hate to fester in the shadows. Heads lowered across the courtroom. Some nodded. Others stiffened, recognizing themselves in the description. Testimony began. Nyla Hayes rose and walked to the stand with measured steps, her back straight, her hands steady. She spoke calmly, recounting the events without embellishment. Her voice trembled only once when she described the moment Herrick spat in her face, an act meant not just to humiliate, but to erase. The courtroom held its breath. Even the cameras seemed to quiet. Then others followed. A black girl labeled trouble for asking questions. A Latino boy mocked for his accent, told success required silence. A white student shamed for poverty, warned she did not belong. Each account locked into the next, forming a pattern no cross-examination could fracture. Herrick's cruelty was not accidental. It was cultivated, rehearsed, protected. It spread because no one in authority had named it aloud. Ray Hensley took the stand with military composure. His voice was even, unadorned. He said he saw. He said he heard. He said
He recorded. He admitted fear of losing a job, fear of retaliation, but greater fear of losing his soul. He handed over the phone. The audio filled the courtroom, Herrick's clipped disdain, the jeers, the slap, and the quiet plea of a child asking for mercy. Several parents covered their mouths. One juror closed her eyes. When the prosecution rested, the defense attempted a pivot. Stress, misunderstanding, a product of changing times. The words fell flat. Truth had weight, and it pressed down on every bench. The judge listened without interruption, her expression unchanged. As she prepared her remarks, the courtroom door creaked open. Heads turned. A woman entered, elegant and reserved, guiding a man by the hand. He was black, dignified in a simple suit. In his arms, a small child clutched a toy rabbit, eyes wide with confusion. Elaine Herrick looked up, her composure fractured. It was her estranged daughter, the one who had left town years ago in defiance of bitterness, and the child was her grandson. The judge paused, sensing the gravity. She invited the young woman to address the court. Her voice was quiet, but it cut clean. She said she left because love in her mother's home had been conditional. She married a good man her mother could never accept. She brought her son so Elaine could see who she had become and who she had lost. She wanted her mother to understand that hate makes a person alone. All eyes returned to Herrick. She lifted a hand, uncertain, as if testing whether the past might still answer her. The boy hid his face against his father's shoulder. He did not speak. He did not smile. That silence, older than his years, landed harder than any sentence. Something in Herrick's face collapsed, not in grief, but in recognition. The verdict followed with finality. Elaine Herrick was sentenced to 5 years in state prison for assault on a minor and hate crime, with no possibility of parole, and permanently barred from education. The gavel struck. The sound echoed like a seal breaking. The room exhaled as if a curse had been lifted. Herrick bowed her head as bailiffs secured the cuffs. She did not look back. Outside, sunlight broke through lingering clouds. Reporters broadcast the decision. Parents held their children tighter than before, as if relearning how. Nyla Hayes, flanked by Simone Hayes and Ray Hensley, stepped into the light of a town forever altered. Not perfect, not healed, but honest. Simone rested a steady hand on her daughter's shoulder. No speech, no salute, just presence. Hensley nodded once, quiet and complete. Across the steps, former students exchanged looks, some relieved, some shaken. All changed. The courthouse doors closed behind them with a weighty finality. In the distance, a school bell rang, thin but clear. The storm had passed. The silence that followed was not empty. It was earned. Justice had not fixed everything, but it had cracked the foundation that protected the rot. And for the first time in Oak Creek, hope had room to grow. Not loud, not triumphant, but real.
A month had passed since the verdict, and Oak Creek High barely resembled the institution it had been. Spring air moved more freely through the corridors, and so did the students. Conversations were no longer hushed or strategic. The old currency of fear and favoritism had collapsed, replaced by something tentative but real, the uneven rhythm of recovery. For the first time in years, the principal's office sat dark. The name Curtis Morrow had been stripped from the door, the polished letters replaced by temporary paper taped without ceremony. Officially, it was called an early retirement. Unofficially, teachers had begun using the word fired without lowering their voices. The board appointed a new principal within weeks.
Dr. Evelyn Brooks arrived without fanfare and without allies to protect. She had a reputation that preceded her: unyielding fairness, procedural clarity, and an intolerance for silence masquerading as stability. Her first act was not discipline, but listening. She scheduled open forums with parents, students, and staff, remaining seated while others spoke. At her inaugural assembly, she stood alone at the podium, no notes in hand. Oak Creek failed its students, she said plainly, and now it would repair what it had broken. No more secrets, no more quiet harm. Every voice mattered, every history would be acknowledged. There was no applause, only a charged stillness. Not skepticism, not resistance, recognition. Something irreversible had begun. Yet the figure who now commanded the deepest respect at Oak Creek was not an administrator or a board member. It was Ray Hensley. For years he had moved through the building unnoticed, pushing his cart, mopping floors after games and assemblies, his military service buried beneath necessity and fear. His silence had never been consent, it had been survival. That silence was broken now. At Dr. Brooks's request, a school-wide assembly was held in the gym. Ray stood near the stage, shoulders squared, suit slightly ill-fitting but worn with dignity. In the wings stood Simone Hayes, dressed in civilian clothes. The night before, she had worked with Veterans Affairs to restore Ray's long-denied service benefits. She had handed him the letter herself. Pension confirmed, health care reinstated. The words, "Thank you for your courage," were finally real. When Ray approached the microphone, the room quieted without instruction. His hands shook only briefly as he unfolded a small paper. "For a long time," he began, "I thought keeping my head down was the only way to survive. But sometimes doing the right thing means risking everything. I want to thank the students who found courage before I did. Oak Creek is better now, not because of me, but because truth was louder than fear." The applause that followed was not polite, it was thunderous. Dr. Brooks presented him with a plaque for extraordinary courage and service to justice and community. No award in that building had ever carried more weight. In the crowd, Nyla Hayes stood straighter than she once had. She no longer avoided the center of the hallway or moved like an apology. Her testimony, her refusal to disappear, had changed how the school saw itself. Teachers who once looked past her now sought her input. Students who had never spoken her name greeted her openly. Invitations arrived from clubs and classrooms. Then, in the next student council election, something unthinkable occurred. Nyla was elected student body president by a landslide, not out of sympathy, out of trust. Her campaign had been simple. Every voice counts. Justice is not a privilege. We move forward together. On the morning of her first address, she felt the familiar chill of doubt loosen its grip. The stage did not intimidate her. She spoke of accountability and empathy, of building a school where no one stood alone against cruelty. "We are only as strong as the least protected among us," she said. From the back of the gym, Simone watched with quiet pride. She knew her daughter's path would never be effortless. Resistance would linger, echoes always do. But Nyla was unbroken, and that was victory enough. In the weeks that followed, Oak Creek continued to change. A student-led diversity council launched forums on belonging. Teachers reviewed disciplinary records for bias. The school issued a public apology naming those harmed, including students who had left before they could see repair. Nyla made it her mission to reach those still afraid, the ones who ate alone, the ones who flinched when called on. She created a peer support group where stories could be spoken without consequence. Slowly, the room filled. When Ray Hensley passed through the halls, students greeted him with respect, not as the janitor, as the man who reminded them what honor looked like. Oak Creek was not perfect. Some wounds required time. But for the first time, hope lived openly in the daylight. Restoration was no longer symbolic.
It was practiced, and victory was no longer measured in titles or applause, but in how a community chose to remember, repair, and finally move forward.
Oak Creek's victory felt visceral, yet jagged. Even as the institution clawed toward dignity, the trauma lingered beneath the surface, a fracture refusing to seal. Apologies could not reach it. Ceremonies failed to cauterize the rot. Simone Hayes recognized the residue in Nyla Hayes's gaze on certain nights, long after the town had archived the scandal. Headlines evaporated and conversations mutated, but inside her daughter, memory remained trapped between agony and possibility, unresolved. Simone grasped a truth the crowd ignored. Justice does not dissolve scars, recognition does not recalibrate the nervous system, and survival emits echoes. This was not a resolution. It was a persistent, static ache. Healing demanded a deeper, more deliberate confrontation. So one stagnant Saturday, as spring mutated into summer, Simone ordered Nyla to grab her jacket. No explanation, just motion. They bypassed Oak Creek's manicured, tree-lined streets, the ball fields where laughter returned too easily. The urban landscape thinned, asphalt surrendered to skeletal land, and silence replaced signal. The car halted at the perimeter of a military cemetery, white marble monoliths stretched in disciplined, unforgiving rows beneath the noon glare, the atmosphere pressing against the chest with a density only history creates. Simone exited first, Nyla following, sensing this place was a calculated test. They navigated between the stones until Simone stopped at a modest marker, unremarkable at first glance, yet heavy with systemic consequence. Nyla frowned, questioning the identity of the occupant. Simone knelt, smoothing the grass with a clinical reverence, answering that this coordinate held Elaine Herrick's husband, the man whose wreckage cast a shadow over Elaine, over Nyla, and over Oak Creek. Confusion hardened into jagged anger. Nyla's voice fractured, demanding to know why they occupied this space. Simone did not rush. Her fingertips remained anchored to the earth. She explained that radical forgiveness is not for the innocent. It is a choice made while staring directly at another person's fundamental brokenness, even when the wound is unearned, even when the trauma is deep. Simone gestured for Nyla to sit. The cemetery breathed in silence, save for a distant flag snapping against the wind like a whip. Simone described how figures like Elaine Herrick internalize unaddressed agony until they miscalculate rage for strength, how hate becomes seductive when grief has no exit, and how hate acts as a poison you drink while praying the enemy collapses. Nyla studied the stone and remembered the courtroom, Herrick's mask shattering when her daughter appeared, that precise second when certainty failed and reality struck. Nyla whispered that Elaine never achieved self-absolution, weaponizing discipline against the world because she could not release her ghosts. Simone nodded. Justice had been only the prologue. Mercy was the victory. The wind shifted. Simone placed a single white flower at the base, not as tribute, but as forensic acknowledgement. She said no uniform shields a person from their choices, and no title rewrites a legacy. She reminded Nyla that forgiveness does not sanitize harm, it simply prevents harm from mutating you into what caused it. After a heavy silence, Nyla asked how to forgive someone who tried to delete her. Simone anchored a hand on Nyla's shoulder and said it begins by refusing to let predators author your identity. Forgiveness is for your equilibrium, not theirs. It is not forgetting, it is an eviction, a refusal to carry their hate in your marrow any longer. Slowly, Nyla stood. She retrieved a white carnation, the same artifact she had once left for her father. She knelt, setting it gently at the headstone's foot, whispering that it was for every secret, every mistake, and every hurt that never achieved closure. She did not forgive because it was deserved, but because she chose to. Simone watched, pride and grief colliding in her gaze, and murmured that this was how the cycle ends, how healing truly begins.
They stood together as sunlight warmed their backs. The weight of old battles did not vanish, but it loosened. Life would test Nyla again, Simone knew, but the foundation had shifted. Justice had been the start. Now the living owned the light. Returning to the car, Nyla glanced back, not with fear, but with autonomous acceptance. The pain existed, but it no longer possessed her. In its place lived something quieter and stronger, forgiveness chosen. Simone opened the door, her voice calm and resolute, and told her daughter it was time to go home. The world was waiting. They drove away, leaving a headstone and a ghost behind. In the silence, Nyla felt the internal knot finally dissolve. The future unfolded not as a burden, but as a promise. The true measure of victory revealed itself not in the wreckage of the fight, but in the peace that followed. The story was finally hers to write. Honesty was the only law left.
1 year later, the wreckage of Oak Creek High no longer dominated headlines. The scandals that once saturated digital feeds had calcified into archives, replaced by academic honors and community projects polished for public optics. Yet inside the institution, among the survivors who navigated the reckoning, the mutation was not cosmetic. It lived in posture and pause, in how dialogue slowed to listen instead of rushing to erase. Memory persisted there, not as a spectacle, but as a discipline. The old order was officially dead. The school felt lighter, as if oxygen-starred windows had finally breached. Sunlight flooded corridors that once felt narrow and surveilled. Lockers gleamed. Bulletin boards displayed raw student creativity instead of administrative warnings. The gymnasium filled early that morning. Banners straight from rafters, fresh jasmine lining the aisles. Families crowded the bleachers, laughter and adrenaline tangling in the atmosphere. Graduation day had arrived, carrying that rare resonance of endings that feel earned and beginnings that finally feel possible. The air tasted of victory. In the primary row sat Nyla Hayes, back vertical beneath her cap, the gold tassel catching the glare against her hair. Weeks earlier, she had been named valedictorian, a distinction forged not only through grades, but through absolute resolve, through the refusal to vanish when erasure was the mandate. A few rows behind her, Simone Hayes sat quietly in simple blue dress. No camouflage, no insignia, just a mother watching the daughter she had fought beside in the trenches. The hierarchy had flipped. The invisible girl was now the center. Around them, parents applauded as names cycled, siblings shifted, and faculty whispered. Some faces were familiar, bearing the weight of the debris. Others were newly hired, unburdened but observant. Simone scrutinized none of it. Her focus remained anchored to Nyla. She recalled the long nights when atmospheric dread pressed in like fog, when the future felt terminal. She remembered promising herself that agony would not be the final chapter. Today was the evidence of that oath. The ceremony unfolded with practiced rituals, a measured address from the principal, a choral performance that vibrated through the gym, a recitation of Oak Creek's history, revised with forensic care. Then Nyla's name was called, and the room froze. She rose with unhurried certainty, navigating toward the stage. For a fleeting moment, Simone saw the ghost Nyla had once been, careful, restrained, trained to stay microscopic. Then that version died. She occupied the podium and gripped the microphone, immovable. Her voice projected without strain. She spoke of the prior year, of believing survival was a muzzle and safety meant being a shadow. She spoke of learning, painfully, that nothing mutates unless someone refuses to avert their eyes. She spoke of fear not as a ghost that vanishes, but as a predator that can be outrun. The audience sat in absolute stunned silence. Her gaze intercepted Simone in the crowd. She thanked her mother for engaging when retreat was the logical path, for teaching her that courage isn't the absence of terror, but the refusal to let terror dictate the trajectory. She thanked allies, faculty, and strangers who chose truth over convenience, who articulated words when silence would have sheltered them. The speech was no longer a student address. It was a terminal report on human dignity. She spoke of scars, visible and internal, not as symbols of frailty, but as forensic evidence of endurance, proof that healing isn't forgetting, but remembering with a jagged purpose. She spoke of elevating others as we ascend, of refusing to abandon anyone because of lineage, appearance, or burden.
The gym leaned forward as her words gathered kinetic force. She was no longer a victim. She was the architect of the new order. She didn't promise ease. She didn't sanitize hardship. She demanded choices, daily surgical choices, to be kind, to be honest, to be present. She challenged her class to be the generation that internalizes what loneliness feels like and refuses to replicate it, to identify harm when it surfaces and intervene before it becomes a tradition. No more looking away, no more complicit quiet. The future, she declared, begins with the courage to speak first. Applause detonated before she finished. It didn't fade, it intensified. As Nyla descended, students began to stand, not just her allies, but the others. Faces once averted now faced her fully. Some bore regret, some bore resolve. Among them stood Hunter Briggs and Cole Trayton, vertical and sober. Silence had cost them their integrity. Understanding had arrived late, but it was absolute. They didn't cheer. They stood in a heavy, respectful acknowledgement of their failure. Then arrived the moment no one scripted. A cohort of students rose, black, white, Latino, Asian, standing rigid. As Nyla hit the floor, they snapped into a crisp military salute. Not a performance, a terminal statement. Recognition of struggle, endurance, and the strategic sacrifices it carried her. An acknowledgement that accountability, when embraced, reshapes identity. Simone's breath caught. She had witnessed salutes in every combat theater imaginable. None had landed with this density. It wasn't for rank or command. It was for the character that had finally survived the war. Character was the only currency. Nyla reached the floor, eyes blazing, cap clutched in her hand. Simone stood, and they met in a fierce, unyielding embrace. No speeches, no explanations, just the quiet understanding of a mission completed together. Finality reached. Behind them, applause rose again, rolling through the gym in waves. Faculty stood, parents stood, even the skeptics stood, drawn into the gravity of a moment that refused to be minimized. As music swelled, Simone leaned close. "Mission accomplished," she whispered softly. "The rest is yours." The lessons forged in fire had taken root, not as hollow slogans, but as permanent, breathing habits. The weeks following graduation carried their own quiet transformations. Nyla prepared for the next chapter, packing boxes and processing forms, fielding letters from elite institutions that had noticed her story. Simone watched with careful distance, knowing when to engage and when to retreat. They talked often, not about trauma, but about boundaries, resilience, and responsibility. Oak Creek continued its recalibration. Policies were honored, training sessions held, student councils debated ethics, not just events. None of it was flawless. Mistakes still surfaced, but when they did, they were named, addressed, neutralized. That was the terminal difference. Honesty won. On a quiet afternoon, Simone returned to the gym solitary. Cheers were stacked, banners purged. The space felt ordinary again. She stood where Nyla had spoken and inhaled a long, steady breath. Victory, she knew, is never clean. It leaves debris. It requires maintenance, but it leaves pathways. As she turned to leave, she noticed a small sign taped near the exit, handwritten. It read simply, "If you see something, say something. We're listening." Always. Outside, the bell rang. Thin but clear. Students crossed the quad, laughing, arguing, existing. Simone walked to her vehicle and sat for a moment before starting the engine. She thought of the endings that led here, of the beginnings still unfolding. The story didn't terminate with bitterness. It closed with choice, with courage practiced daily. Healing had not erased the past. It had transformed it.